Poor Auburn, poor number one overall seed, SEC champion, number one in the AP poll for 8 straight weeks. Auburn. Should the Tigers even bother being in San Antonio this weekend for the Final Four? After all, this is the greatest Final Four of all time, according to all the members of the Geek Squad, the top 4 teams in the country, some of the top teams of all time based on advanced metrics. And yet all of these pundits, all of these wise guys in Vegas, all of these stat geeks, they tell us Auburn is the least of the 4 teams in the Final Four. Look, Auburn season started with a plane trip to Texas that included some airborne hijinks. So maybe it's tempting fate to go back to that same state. We'll see. To discuss this Final Four coming up, the third in the last 6 years, by the way, in which a team from the state of Alabama has been represented. This is the second trip for Auburn. Alabama went last year. Is my partner in crime, the host of CBS Sports Saturday during college football Saturday, I should say, during the college football season. He allows me to hang out on that show with him from CBS-42 in Birmingham. When people say this phrase now, he knows ball, before anyone ever thought of that phrase, Scott Griffin knew ball. Scott, how you doing, man?
Scarbouh, how are you, man? What's happening?
I'm good. I
like the new gig. I like the awards in the background, the numerous plaques.
Yeah, you know how much I had to pay to buy those at the local trophy shop? I joke, I kid. But you got to love Scott. I guarantee you I am the only podcast whose background includes a Birmingham Southern basketball, which my younger son Cannon earned at a camp there, and a Samford basketball, which Jimmy Tillet's wife gave to my older son Kaiser. His first college basketball game was at Samford when he was 1 year old. Now he's a college student at the University of Florida, which has set up a serious conflict for this weekend.
Yes.
Since I'm Mr. Basketball in the state of Alabama, and he's, of course, go Gators. So we'll see how that works out on Saturday. We have a family wager on that one, and we'll see how it turns out. Now, Scott, we've heard the phrase Auburn being Auburn, or just Auburn being Auburn. And usually that's used as a criticism or a slur because something has gone wrong on the Plains. And I'm using it in this case that this is the best thing that could have happened to Bruce Pearl and company, that they are seen as the number 4 of the 4 number 1 seeds, the way they're playing right now, despite what they did during the regular season. Is this going to be one of those situations where Auburn takes advantage of that chip on its shoulder, which it usually uses to great advantage?
Well, they can for sure, right? I mean, they're that good, as you know. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know because they're so well-rounded. They can win a fast game. They can win a slow, ugly game like Tennessee would bring to you. They can go down low to Broome and get a basket most of the time when they've got to get a basket. They got 3-point shooters everywhere that can get hot. They really, to me, ironically, seem to be the most well-rounded team as far as being able to win any type of game than the 4. But to your point, I think everybody's so focused on Houston looks so good against Tennessee, right? I mean, 4 minutes ago in the first half, Tennessee has 8 points. Houston was great switching defense, as you saw, just terrific, held them off in the second half. Duke looked fantastic. They looked fantastic all year. They looked even better against Alabama, and they did it without Flag going bananas, right? And then Florida has looked great winning the SEC tournament. They beat Auburn at home to stop their streak. So I guess the chatter is somewhat legitimate, but to your point, Auburn is the number 1 overall seed. And to your point also, Pearl using it because he's an underdog mentality. As you know, he loves that. So, yes, I think for sure he will use that, as well as that Yale exit a year ago, right? I mean, that's got to be some fire too.
I remember asking Janai Broome about that at SEC Media Days here in Birmingham before the season began, before anyone envisioned that Auburn would be the dominant team in the SEC this year. Everyone thought that was going to be Alabama. Remember the preseason debate was who's number one, Kansas or Alabama? Kansas was given the nod in the preseason AP poll. Clearly, they didn't live up to that billing. Alabama did. Alabama stayed in the top 10 the entire season. And Auburn started number 11. It's not like they were considered a complete underdog. They started number 11, quickly got to number 5, and never dipped below that. And, of course, like I said, spent 8 straight weeks at number 1. But it's interesting, these Ken Pom rankings of the teams that are in the Final Four now. And of the entire history of Ken Pom, which started in 1996, 1997, when Ken Pomeroy started putting together these advanced metric rankings, did offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency. He ranked the teams based on those characteristics and others, strength of schedule, non-conference strength of schedule. Obviously, a lot of data and a lot of thought went into these. I kid about the Geek Squad, but these guys put a lot of effort into these numbers they produce. And of the top 10 teams of all time in the Ken Pom ratings, 4 of them are in this Final Four. If we could look at that, Brendan. 14, that's amazing just on its face, Scott.
Oh, absolutely.
We're going to look at it. There you see the teams highlighted in blue are this year's Final Four teams, and the other teams that make up the top 10 of Ken Pom all time. As you look at that, Scott, the first thing that jumps out at me is, first of all, that doesn't guarantee you a national championship. Of the other 6 teams you'll notice on that list, 3 of them won the national championship, Duke in 2001, UConn last year, Kansas in 2008. 2 of them, though, lost in the championship game. The number 1 all-time Ken Pom team, Duke in 99.
Yeah.
And Gonzaga lost to Baylor in 2021 in that championship game. And that Kentucky team in 2015, which was 38-0 when they got to the national semifinals, they got beat by Wisconsin. Didn't even get to the championship game.
I remember that. Yep.
That's my first thought. What's your takeaway when you look at these rankings? First of all, about the quality of the field. Is this the best Final Four you can remember, just based on your eye test as well as these numbers?
Yeah, I think it's the first time since that Kansas team at number 9 that we've had 4 1s in it, right? So
correct. Yes.
The all 4 1. So that tells you something right there. But not surprising, because all these teams legitimately are really good at defense, really good at offense. Duke's the number 2 offensive team, and yet they played such great defense against Alabama because they had that length everywhere.
Yeah.
We know
they're in the top 4. They're in the top 4 offense and defense.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why they're the highest rated. You notice they're the second highest rated all-time Ken Pom team, right behind that 99 team.
That's right.
But that 99 team didn't win the championship. They lost to UConn and Rip Hamilton.
Yep. And Houston obviously can defend. We saw that's how they beat Tennessee, but they obviously can score and get out and run as well. Florida is so good with their interior defense that they can pressure the ball outside. That makes them better defensively probably than their athleticism says. Plus, they got so many big guys in there, so they rebound well, which limits possessions. So I think all these teams are so well-rounded. There's not one that's great on offense, but kind of good on defense, or vice versa. They're all just really good. And I think, help me remember on the Ken Pom, every national champion's one is it top 25 offense, top 50 defense. There's some formula where he's got it that literally every or almost every champion has won being at a certain ranking, right?
Yeah. You've got to be good on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
Now, you don't have to be elite on both sides of the ball, because every Final Four is not full of 4 elite teams.
Right.
I mean, look at 2 years ago. People are talking about this year and people complaining, which just boggles my mind. If you like basketball, don't you want to see the best teams in the Final Four?
Yeah.
Do you really want to see a George Mason, a VCU from 2011, teams that are great stories, but when they get to that final weekend, they're not going to win. Now, Butler was the exception, of course.
Yeah.
They came real close on that shot by Gordon Hayward to beating Duke in that one national championship game. But for the most part, shouldn't we want to see the best teams?
Yeah.
But it is striking to me, Scott. I was watching a podcast yesterday with Ryan Russillo from ESPN, and I don't know if he's still at ESPN. He was at ESPN. He's a basketball guy. He had Jay Billis on there, ESPN's lead commentator now on the sport of college basketball. They talked about the Final Four for an entire hour. The first 15 minutes, they barely mentioned Auburn. They broke down Duke. They broke down Houston. They broke down Florida. And then they got around to talking about Auburn, and they said a lot of nice things. But it was clear by their attitude, by the placement of the teams in the order in which they discussed them, that while they said, or Billis said at least, yeah, all four teams could win this national championship. It wouldn't be a surprise. Any combination of championship games based on the semifinal results, that all four teams are capable. But you could just sense that they don't quite think Auburn is where those other teams are now or where Auburn was earlier in the season. And is this Auburn team a prisoner in a sense of how good it was earlier in the year?
Maybe a little bit, because as you know, I read body language like you do and different things. They have at times can get disinterested and lazy, like Alabama exhibited several times with certain players. Mark Sears could get disinterested. That's your best player. Sometimes Janai Broome, let's be honest, can get disinterested defensively, offensively, whatever. But he's also up with flag, obviously, for the National Player of the Year. So it's kind of interesting that this team that's the number one overall, as you said, with a National Player of the Year candidate that dominated, at least till the very end, the best league in the history of college basketball is not getting love, right? That's kind of bizarre. And again, as we talked about, what I think is that they can win the game so many different ways. We've seen them win at Kentucky with Broome being very pedestrian because Miles Kelly went nuts hitting the three. So I don't know where that comes from, because again, they were the best team in the best league. They didn't finish the SEC tournament right, but I contend they didn't have a lot to play for. And with the personalities on this team, they need something to play for, which now they have. They were going to be the number one overall seed, as you know, whether they won the SEC tournament or not. So it really didn't matter, except to hang an SEC tournament banner. They won the regular season already. And I think that's kind of explains their drop at the end, plus great competition, obviously, Alabama, Florida, people like that. So I can't explain why they're not giving them love, because I certainly think they deserve it. I'm sure you feel the same way. It's kind of weird.
It is weird.
But here's another thing that's weird. I was just looking at Pearl's record, and you probably have noted this. This is in the last 8 years, counting this year, Auburn has been eliminated all but 2 times in the second round or earlier in the NCAAs, and some years didn't make it, like 21 and 2021, whatever that is. So
yeah, that was the year. Remember that year they self-imposed right before the season. They self-imposed a postseason ban. They were getting hit with NCAA probation based on that absolutely ridiculous overreach of an FBI investigation, in which I don't think a single head coach paid a price, or maybe one or two. Will Wade certainly did, but it was the assistant coaches that got hammered, while the head coaches, and Chuck and I have talked about that on a number of occasions. And if you one day we'll share the full story of what happened to him, and it will blow your mind of the FBI's involvement, but I don't want to get into that now. So, I think there's something about that Auburn has not had the success. They've been great in the regular season.
Yeah,
they've been really good in the SEC tournament. They won it in 2019. They won the tournament last year.
Mm-hmm.
They've won now regular season championships in 2018, 2022, 2025. They just haven't been as good in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and all but 2 again in the last 8, second round or earlier, and they've been a better team than that. So to your point, again, I think he likes the underdog thing. I think he does better. It's how he was at Green Bay, Milwaukee, and Tennessee for a while. But he gets teams so good because the guy's won, a ton of games, and 72% of his games, that he can't play the underdog role well. So I think he's salivating over this kind of I don't know what word you would use, embarrassing diss, if you will, of what how everybody's viewing the best team from the best league in the history of college basketball. That's amazing.
You know, they have made a habit of, and this is so different from the old days. You remember, and I cut myself off. You remember in the old days, the locker room was a sacred space.
Yeah.
You know, they would let us miscreants in the media visit after games to do interviews. But pregame, you didn't see videos of coaches pregame talks to their teams,
No.
or teams dancing in the locker room afterwards and dousing the coach with water when they won a big game. Now everything's on film, and when they want you to see it, you see it. And Bruce Pearl has, as you would expect, has been really good at motivating his team in these videos, and they're interesting to watch. I will guarantee you that before Saturday's game against Florida, he's going to hammer the fact that they're the underdog.
Yeah.
They lost to Florida in February. They lost by 9, but it was a lot worse. They were down 21. No one thinks you can win this game. Why don't you show them who you really are? It's going to be a version of that. And on that subject, I went back and looked. Auburn is kind of, sort of, on a revenge tour going into this game. Now, let's flash back. That season you referenced when they became the first team in the state of Alabama to get to the Final Four, 2018-19. In the regular season, they played Kentucky twice. They lost a close game in Auburn, and then Kentucky ran them out of Rupp Arena.
Yep.
And who do they run into in the Elite Eight? The Big Blue Nation. And what happened then? Jared Harper happened. Bryce Brown happened.
Yes.
Auburn won that game in overtime to break through the state's glass ceiling and get to the Final Four. Okay? You say, all right, well, that's great. That was 6 years ago on the calendar, 5 seasons ago, 5 postseasons ago, because we didn't have one because of COVID, obviously, that one year. But, okay, I'll give you something more recent. How about last year? Florida and Auburn played only once last season. And Florida, if you recall, that game was in Gainesville, and Florida smoked Auburn. Who did Florida play in the SEC tournament championship game? The Florida Gators.
Yeah.
And Auburn returned the favor. And Bruce Pearl and company spanked his protege, Todd Golden, and the Gators thoroughly. It was a 35-point turnaround in final margin from the regular season game to the postseason game. So I always look for, as you do, I look for patterns.
Yeah.
I look for habits. And happens once, maybe it's a fluke. It happens twice, makes you think. And now here they are in the same situation. They got beat in Auburn by Florida. Like I said, it was a 9-point game, 90-81. But if you look at it,
worse.
It's much worse.
Yeah.
In fact, it just blows my mind to even say this out loud, Scott. Listen to this. At the 14-minute mark of the first half in that game, Auburn was up 10, 15-5. They came out on fire. At the 14-minute mark of the second half, which is 20 minutes of game time later, Florida led by 21.
That's amazing.
That's a 31-point swing
right.
in 20 minutes of basketball time to the negative for the team at that point that was number 1 in the country in Auburn. They had won 9 straight games to open the conference season. They were 9-0 in the SEC. They only had 1 loss, and that was at Duke in early December. And Florida just flipped that switch. So does that mean anything now other than the motivational factor for Auburn? Having played that other team, having been on the floor with this team, does that matter at all Saturday? And if so, why is it?
Well, Bruce Pearl will try to make it matter. And as you know, they all, the old coaches saying different things, that it matters maybe in preparation and such, but it goes away after the first few minutes of a game, right? So, and both teams are good. Florida's going to come out well too. But to your point, yeah, it'll matter because Bruce Pearl will use it that way. And if they get off to a great start, great starts, little spurts, I think, have increased meaning in these games. So, for instance, Duke got out on Alabama 15-5. And I remember thinking at the time, they may not can come back from this, which sounds crazy. But to your point of what you just said, if you think about it in terms of, okay, it's 10 minutes into the game, Duke's up by 10. So now look at it like we've got a 30-minute game left, and I just spotted Duke 10-0. If you look at it that way, which is what it is, what are your chances of winning? So if Auburn can take this initial emotion and make it a spurt and get up by 10 or 12, I kind of like Auburn in a 30-minute game up 12-0 against whomever, including Florida. So it's going to be interesting. And I've noticed that on any of the spurts. I noticed Michigan State couldn't come back from their deal, right, against Duke.
Against Auburn in that Elite Eight game. What was it, the 17-0 run?
No, against Auburn, yes, excuse me.
The Tigers in that first half.
Right. They had that spurt 17-0 run, right? I
Yeah.
think it was 8-6, and then it became 25-6. So,
and then Michigan State was running up. They were running uphill the rest of the night.
Yeah, and people go, well, yeah, they cut it to 6. But you know how much energy they expended to cut it to 6? And then Auburn would score 2 baskets and be 10 or 12 again. So there's something to, even with good teams play, if you get an 8 or 10-0 spurt, boy, you can really use that and do some damage. So getting back to the original point, if he can get them emotional, they can start this game well, and they've got that guy inside. They can throw it on the post to get some easy buckets, even though Florida's got a big front line. That's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens. And to your point also, they should hope Duke wins, right? Because they lost to Duke earlier this year. They beat Houston.
That's right.
So they would have 2 with the little payback emotional thing. So I'm sure Bruce Pearl is probably hoping that. But these teams are so good, it doesn't matter how it shakes out.
Yeah, but listen, you are spot on as usual, or most of the time anyway. And if you look at, and this is another reason why I don't think the people who are setting odds, the people who are opining on these games have really looked at this, because yeah, Florida was playing great down the stretch of the regular season in the SEC tournament. But have people been watching the NCAA tournament? Have they seen how slow Florida has started the last 3 games? They were tied at the half with UConn. They were up only 2 at halftime against Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
And they were up only 3 at halftime against Texas Tech. And then the Red Raiders really flipped that thing and looked like they had the game in hand until Walter Clayton Jr. went Steph Curry Jr., and it was lights out for Texas Tech. But Florida has really struggled in the first half, but so has Auburn. Auburn hasn't looked great in the first half in the NCAA tournament, with the exception, as you said, of that Michigan State spurt. They went out on that 17-0 run, and Michigan State was not coming back from that. Auburn is too good. You can't put yourself in that kind of a hole and expect to defeat a good team. And that's exactly what happened to Alabama against Duke. And that's why I don't really understand people not giving Auburn its due. Maybe one reason, or maybe multiple reasons, because he injured multiple body parts on one play, is the health of Janai Broome.
Yeah.
Do you find it comical, as I do, that, and you hear this a lot from Alabama fans, and this is part of the rivalry, right? That this guy fakes more injuries and pain and wounds. He's limping around. He's laying on the floor after hitting the floor. He's essentially playing a game, a mind game here. He's not really hurt. He's not really banged up. Go back and freeze frame the moment when he landed awkwardly against Michigan State. And you have a great knowledge. You have worked in sports medicine, sports physical therapy. You've been around the best in the business, Dr. James Andrews, Kevin Wilk, the elite of the elite in dealing with sports injuries. And the way that his left leg locked and his right elbow extended, he wasn't faking a thing.
Right.
What's your take on Johni Broome? Again, given your pretty extensive knowledge of sports medicine and the people you've been around, from what you've seen, I know they're not going to tell us the full story.
No.
Nor should they.
Right. He might be 98% fine and they're not saying that, right?
Yes. So what's your take on from what you've seen and your experience in that area?
Well, I'll be totally transparent, Kevin. I thought the same thing. That thought went through my mind when he went down, because I thought, well, that was kind of a soft deal there for him to be sitting there with the trainer. And he didn't look like he was in pain. I always read a guy's face. It's not like he was anguishing, right? So he was kind of talking to the trainer. I thought, he's milking this to get a little rest. And then they took him to the locker room. And I thought, okay, Auburn's up by 10 or 12. So maybe they're just going to double check. But to your point, when you saw the slow motion, and then you saw that awkward hyperextension, they would call that medically, of the leg, and then the elbow issue, that made me pause and go, okay, well, this might be something. And you're gonna err to the side of caution. It would have been interesting to see if they were down by 10, if he'd have gone to the locker room, or what. Because that might have changed it, but they went and checked him out. They had a cushion. They still had the cushion when he came back, and he played. So I think there's a little truth to that. But I said this in the newsroom to a female sportscaster that was a college athlete. It seems like guys, always are injured. They never go down and get right back up. Have you ever noticed that? Any of them. They've got to take their time and kind of check it. And to your point, you look at the replay and you're like, what? Nothing happened to the guy. What's he doing? But women athletics, and we're kind of getting off topic, but it dawned on me at the time, women athletics get hurt and they always pop up unless they're injured.
Unless they're truly injured.
So I think it's a guy basketball thing or something, but Johni does milk it a little bit. But I think that was legitimate twinging and hyperextension of the knee, but I don't think it's going to be a factor.
Here's how closely people dissect these things. When Auburn was leaving Neville Arena to get on the bus to go to the airport to fly to San Antonio, and of course there was a crowd. They call it the reverse Tiger Walk, to send them off with good wishes and good vibes. And Johni was, of course, he's dapping and giving five, but he's doing it with his left hand. Not the one. He injured his right elbow, and of course he's left-handed. And people were saying, "Aha! You see, he won't even shake anybody's hand with his right hand because he's hurt. He's truly hurt. He's going to be 50%." I don't know where these internet doctors come from and where they get their medical degrees, but it was comical. And other people pointed out, if you really watch the whole video, he was holding a drink in one hand, so obviously he's connecting with the people, the fans, with the other hand. And then he actually changed the drink from right hand to left hand. And then he was shaking hands with his right hand. So I think that theory may have been debunked in the exact video that people were using as evidence that Johni Broome's not going to be 100%. But let's be honest.
It should be debunked with what you just said, though.
Exactly.
That he's left-handed. So it doesn't matter if he has a cast on his arm. He's left-handed, right?
The dude came back in the game, snatched a one-handed rebound with his left arm, and then he hits a three and was pure with it, which he usually isn't when he shoots from three. Are you like me? Every time I watch an Auburn game and I see him, and you can almost see his mind moving. You see the wheels spinning.
It's time to try.
I'm open. I'm going to let this fly. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, no, it is a wasted possession when you shoot the ball from the three-point line. And occasionally he'll knock him down. He knocked down too early against Alabama in that 1-versus-2 game in Tuscaloosa. How impressive. And you and I were both at that game. Let's flash back for a second. How big a game was that for basketball in the state of Alabama? And how impressive was it that Auburn really controlled that game in a incredibly hostile environment?
It was fantastic. he's a 25% shooter. And to your point, he hit, I think, the first 2 of the game, if I remember correctly.
They were early, yes.
Yeah. But that goes back again to what kind of makes the point of what we're talking about. Didn't they have a little spurt at the beginning? What was the score? Do you remember?
9-0. I think it was 9-0 out of the gate.
Do you want to spot Auburn 9 points with 35 minutes left in the game? Because I think Alabama didn't score for 3 or 4 minutes maybe, or scored very little. You don't want to do that. So it seems to me with good teams get together, short spurts can be deadly if somebody can go on them, which you would think is not correct because you think, well, good teams can overcome that, but they're playing a real good team. So, and in Auburn's case, if you saw the game like we talked about, when Alabama got a little close, cut it to 4, 5, 6, whatever they cut it to, what did they do? They throw it in the post on that left block so he can go left, or on the right block so he can fake right and go left. He's an automatic basket down there. So, but talking about the atmosphere, obviously it was fantastic. But you and I have seen big Alabama Auburn games before for years. It's just nobody noticed, it seems like, until now. So it's great for basketball, and obviously helped catapult Alabama Auburn in the national scene on that. But I guess you live with his 3-point shots, which is probably what Pearl does. He only shoots 25%, like we said, but it looks good coming out of his hand, but the end result usually isn't good. And it's a lot of time ill-timed. There are ill-timed threes, as you know. It's like, no, don't shoot it now. Shoot it when you're up by 16. Not when the other team's on an 8-0 run and we need a basket. Don't shoot it then.
Because if you're Auburn, I love the phrase ill-timed.
Yes.
That's a polite word for saying don't take that shot right now.
Horrible. Yes.
But because when Auburn needs a basket, if Janai Broome doesn't touch it on the block or near the block, something has gone awry, unless Tahad Pettiford is just playing conscience-free. To me, he's a different style of player. But in terms of the joy that he plays the game with, the expressions on his face, the absolute lack of a conscience, zero fear, he reminds me a bit of Hollywood Robinson from Alabama, who was out there blowing bubbles while he's playing, chewing double bubble, whatever bubble gum he favored. Tahad is like that. He is dangerous. He's a dangerous man. He had one bad game I can remember. It was Tennessee in the SEC tournament when he couldn't make a shot. The dude is a bucket getter. He knows how to make shots. I think he could be the difference in this game for Auburn. What's your thought?
He could be. He's gotten better, as you've seen over the year, and you've noticed, I'm sure. He's let the game come to him early here in his freshman campaign. So he's kind of monitored and rode the waves of the SEC, and then as he's gotten more confident and better and figures, oh yeah, I can play with these guys. He's helped develop his game. He hasn't forced the issue. And to your point, lately in the season and tournament and all that, he has really started to shine and even look for his shot a lot of times. If Broome's open on the post, he's confident enough to still take that jumper and work his guy off the dribble. So he's been fantastic. Obviously, Miles Kelly, Denver Jones can get hot. They're good 3-point shooters, but they can get really smoking hot like Kelly did against Kentucky. So all those guys are important, but none of them have that thought of taking a guy off the dribble, which makes the guy guarding Pettiford rock back a little bit. And then Pettiford can also sit back and use that to his advantage and hit the three. So he's got that kind of game, and he's learned how to use that here late in the season, and he's been terrific. So yes, he can be very big because Florida's got all those big guys against Broome. If any team is set up to defend Janai Broome, it would be Florida, and to have multiple guys and multiple fouls to defend Broome. So Pettiford could be really important in this game.
All right, let's touch on one more aspect of this game.
Okay.
Before we finish today, and that's the coaches. We all know about the relationship between Bruce Pearl and Todd Golden. Todd is like a son to Bruce. They've both said that, and it's not just empty rhetoric. They know each other very well. Todd Golden is best friends, self-described best friends with Stephen Pearl.
That's right.
Who is Bruce's right-hand man on the Auburn staff. I liken it to, and tell me if I'm crazy, okay? Well, I may be crazy anyway, but on this point, tell me if I'm crazy. I look at Bruce Pearl and Todd Golden, and I see shades of Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. And let me explain that just a little further before I get your feedback on it. Because I have since the day he was introduced at Auburn, since the day he was hired and then introduced in Auburn Arena before the Nevilles bought the naming rights, that Bruce Pearl was the basketball version of a hire in this state, that's similar to Nick Saban in football. What he meant for not just his school and his program, but for that sport in this state. Mm-hmm. It made the other school in the Iron Bowl rivalry sit up and take notice and say, we better get serious here, guys, because they just hired someone who is serious, and he is going to work 24/7, 365 to kick our tails. And so that elevated basketball across the state when they hired Bruce Pearl. And Todd Golden was part of that. He was on that staff the first 2 years that Bruce was at Auburn. Mm-hmm. Is it an advantage? Remember, it took Kirby a while to beat Nick. He only did it once in that 2021 championship game. Came close a number of times, but there seemed to be some stigma there. Now, I know Todd Golden is 2-2 against Bruce Pearl at Florida.
Yeah.
But he lost that SEC tournament championship game last year, the bigger game, the biggest game they've played so far. Is there an advantage to being the mentor rather than the protege when the whole world is watching? You are on the biggest stage in your sport. Is that an advantage for Bruce Pearl?
Yeah, and to what we talked about earlier, Todd Golden knows exactly that Bruce Pearl's going to use all this dissing, if you will, of Auburn and not noticing how good they are. He's going to use that. And Todd Golden, I'm sure, is going to pound in his team's head because he's been in the locker room when Bruce Pearl did that, right? Several times. So, and it was legitimate with Auburn only winning 26 games their first 2 years. But he's going to warn his team, but it doesn't matter if Bruce Pearl has his team with the mat on and you dissed our team, and they use that, at the beginning of a game. So I think there's something to that. To your point, it's 2-2, but basketball's different, as you know, than football. Football's once a year, sometimes twice a year with Saban and Kirby Smart. And I don't think Kirby Smart was like Lane Kiffin. Kiffin wanted to beat Saban so bad that sometimes he'd make goofy decisions, like when Alabama got big in the game a few years ago. I don't remember what year. He's going for it on fourth down, and midway through the second quarter, it's like, you're on your own 25, or whatever. So he just gets so animated to beat Nick Saban. And I don't think Kirby did that with Nick, and I don't think Golden would do that with Bruce. But there's something to being the older guy, knowing how to get your team. There's nothing that's going to surprise Bruce Pearl in the preparation. He's got 12 speeches for this particular game he could pick from his past, right? And 10 of them would probably work. So, yeah, you're probably right. The bigger the stage, the more at stake. I'm going to side with the mentor anytime, probably.
And that's the cool dichotomy we have here in this Final Four. You've got two coaches in their 60s.
Yeah.
In Bruce Pearl, and Kelvin Sampson's closer to 70. Bruce just turned 65. And then you've got two guys in their 30s in Todd Golden and John Shire from Duke. Yeah. That is, as veterans ourselves, I'm like you. I tend to lean towards the experienced guy. Now, the players are going to decide the game.
No doubt.
More than the coaches. But the coaches can help. They can make a difference in little ways here and there. So, and Scott, go ahead.
Who's made more in-game decisions than Kelvin Sampson and Bruce Pearl? Even if John Shire and Todd Golden have made great ones, and they have they done it as many times as Bruce Pearl and Kelvin Sampson? No.
No. All right. Now, I know you're like me. You don't really like predictions because –
and you're going to make me do it.
I would never force you. I don't have a weapon here to hold at your head or to point at you through the through the internet. But just give me maybe a parting thought. Who's most likely to be in that championship game on Monday night, based on, again, your knowledge of the game, your knowledge of these teams? You've seen Auburn in person. And who's likely to cut down that last net on Monday night?
I think what we've talked about now for 30 minutes, Auburn beats Florida in the rematch for the reasons we talked about. Although Florida is playing the best, or they were, to the eyes where we watched them, since we watched SEC, there at the end, I thought, man, this is a national championship team. This Clayton Cat and his compadres and these rotating, grass-fed power forwards that they have, 10 of them it looked like, is really good. But I tend to think Auburn, again, they just can win so many different kinds of games. They can win a 54-52 game. They can win an 86-82 game. I like them. Boy, Duke looked really good against Alabama, didn't they? Although Houston guarded Tennessee like crazy, but I think Tennessee was off as well. So there was a combination there. And we saw in the second half, Tennessee played them even, but that spreadability again, they could never catch up. So I think it's going to be Auburn-Duke. And boy, it's hard for me to pick a national champion. If we go with the theme we're talking about, Auburn should upset Duke. And it's going to be Broome against Flagg, although they're two different players. Because Broome's not going to guard Flagg, as you know. They got to find somebody to guard it. So I'm
if he does, Duke. Auburn's in trouble.
Exactly. So I'm probably leaning Duke. I don't think many people can guard Broome, and he can have a field day too. But Flagg initiates so much offense besides providing it himself. And his emotion and hunger for the game is so infectious. I would probably take Duke again. But it could be anybody. Houston could win the thing, with a 7-man rotation. So I don't know. It's going to be very interesting. Though. I want to hear your thoughts, though. Don't just ask me.
Well, it is going to be fun to watch. I am excited that the 4 best teams, clearly the 4 best teams in the country, are in the Final Four. We don't get that very often. As you said, we've only had the 4 1 seeds once before in 2008. Ironically, also in San Antonio, and Kansas prevailed. Memphis let that one get away. That's a whole nother topic for another day on how Memphis gagged that game away with Derrick Rose and an incredible team they had. But I'm excited for that reason. I think we're going to get 3 really good games that are not decided until the final 5 minutes, maybe the final 2 minutes. Maybe it comes down to a last shot. And Scott, I have been riding the theme. I love storylines. I love stories. I love telling stories. This has been, without a doubt, all apologies to Wimp Sanderson and Sonny Smith and Gene Bartow, the greatest basketball season across the board at every level in this history of the state of Alabama. There's only one way for this season to end, to put a cherry on top of that season, and that is for Auburn to play Duke in the national championship game, and for Auburn to beat Duke in the national championship game, and to deliver the state of Alabama its first men's Division I national championship in the sport of basketball. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
How amazing would that be? So we have similar things, different outcomes in the championship. Either one could happen, though, easily in the game of basketball, as you know. Depends on how the game's called. So it's going to be great to watch. So to your point, I'm going to be glued.
As will I, as will a lot of other people. Scott Griffin, this has been so much fun. We'll have to do this again. You and I could talk sports for hours, for days. We've done that before. We used to do a 4-hour radio show. And we never had a worry about dead air when we did it.
I think we've gone over our time now.
We probably have, but that's the cool thing about online is you're not limited to a time.
There's no clock, my friend.
Keep up the great work.
We can camp out in the lane, podcast wise, all time, just like your boy Zach Edney did last year when they didn't.
Yes, The 3-second rule did not apply to Zach Edey in Purdue for 4 years. He had a great college career, of course, but not too sad to see him go. But again, I hope everybody enjoys an incredible Final Four. Scott, thank you again. Thank you to Brendan Martin, the best producer in the business, making this all work. It's almost time, folks. Let's get to it. The Final Four. We cannot wait. See you next time on Scarbouh Knows.